deserve it, and he has no right to be king, so he throws a party. But one of his biggest fears was that there was going to be a Jewish revolt, because there was a prophecy that Jews and non-Jews both knew, which was that in the 70th year after the destruction of the temple, 70 years after the destruction of the temple, the Jews were going to return to Israel in all their glory. 70 years, and they would build the second temple. That was a prophecy of Yechezkel as the Jews were being exiled. And when it says third year of his reign, okay, it says third year of his reign, that was when he threw the party, because the way he calculated it, from the time that his father-in-law Nebuchadnezzar attacked the Jews, it was 67 years. He counted from the time that they attacked, 70 years to that point, and he was waiting for the Jewish miracle to happen, and it never occurred. But he miscalculated. The prophet didn't say that the Jews would go back in the 70th year since the attack. He said that they would go back in 70 years since the exile. The attack took 3 years. So Achashverosh threw the party 3 years too early. And in this party, he took out the dishes from the Beis HaMikdash, the kelim, the things that were used in the Beit HaMikdash, that the Babylonians, when they conquered the Beit HaMikdash, took back with them. And he took them out. That's what you see in this picture. They're using the very kelim from the Beis HaMikdash. And the Jews should have been tremendously upset. They should have been crying over the fact of seeing this, but instead they participated in the party. And that was a huge tragedy. The Jews should never have participated. And they made a miscalculation. They said, if we don't participate in this party, then the rest of the non-Jews in Shushan and in all these provinces, and Achashverosh the king, they're going to look at us as different. And they're going to say we're different. And therefore we have to participate in this party to show that we're just like them. In trying to fit in, they set themselves up for a great tragedy. That leads us to our next point. At this party, Achashverosh, who again is always paranoid about making sure that he fits in, that he's royalty, that everybody likes him, wants to show off how he is royalty, how he fits in. So what does he do? He says, I'm going to bring down my queen, and I'm going to show that she listens to me. Why do I have to show that she listens to me? Because I am the king. I have to make sure that everybody understands that my queen listens to me. So he orders Vashti to come down. Our rabbi tells us that he ordered her to come down to his party. He was having a party for the men. She was having a party for the women. And he ordered her to come down without any clothes, undressed, to show off her beauty. The greatest disgrace. What kind of an animal does something like this? And after she refuses, which is his greatest fear, that she's going to refuse and he's going to look like an outsider, he's not going to look like royalty, his advisor, who at this point is called Memuchan, but is really Haman, his advisor says to him, you have to kill Vashti, because if you don't execute Vashti, then women all over the 120 provinces that you rule will rebel against their husbands. They won't listen to their husbands. They'll say, look at what Vashti did. Vashti didn't listen to her husband. Vashti didn't listen to the king. We don't have to listen to our husbands. And then there's going to be complete chaos throughout the whole kingdom. Women won't listen to their men. You have to execute her. And being so completely irrational, being so completely crazy, Achashverosh listens to this advice. Who would kill their own wife because somebody thousands of miles away is not gonna be able to control his wife? And what kind of a society thinks that a healthy marriage requires you to control your own wife? That a marriage isn't a partnership. And that's the crazy advice that Achashverosh gets and follows, and he executes his wife. But that sets up, of course, the entire Purim story. And it sets up Esther becoming the queen. What happens? Achashverosh is without a wife. He doesn't have a wife now. So who does he look towards? He looked towards now, where can I get a wife? So he sets up this disgusting, despicable, horrific type of competition where every virgin girl in the 127 provinces are brought to the capital, bathed in oils and perfumes in order to look pretty. And then they all have to sleep with him. And he disgustingly abuses each and every one of these women, and then chooses Esther to become the queen. And what we see here is that God understood what was going to happen. Obviously, he could foresee the future. And whenever something bad happens to the Jewish people, God always sets up what we call the analogy, and this I would write down, the analogy of the medicine before the illness takes place. Esther is like the medicine. The Jewish people are about to fall into an anti-Semitic plot to annihilate them. A genesis, a Holocaust is about to happen to them. But God already sets up the healing beforehand and allows Esther to become the queen. Esther is chosen. The chances of Esther, of all the women in 127 provinces being chosen, is minuscule. And yet, she's the one that's chosen. Mordechai is a palace employee. He's a translator. He's an incredibly wise person and gets a job because the king rules over 127 provinces and has conquered many, many other kingdoms. There are people that speak different languages. People speak various different languages throughout the kingdom, and they come to approach Ahasuerus, and he can't understand them, so he has to hire a wise person. Mordechai is one of the wisest people of the generation and gets a job that allows him to be inside the palace gates. He understands what's going on. He can see deep inside, and he'll know if anything bad is about to happen to the Jews in this position. And Mordechai does something incredibly genius. And here's what I want you guys, and this is why the Megillah has so much to do with what we learn about all the time about Israel advocacy and about advocating for Israel. Because a lot of times we imagine that the best way of having an influence is by protesting, by demonstrating, by standing up and going against the rulership. But in fact, the best way is by being friends with the king, by ingratiating yourself with the king, by making sure the king owes you. And here's how Mordechai sets himself up. What does he do? He saves the king. He hears about two people, Bigtan and Teresh, who are planning to assassinate the king. And Mordechai relates the plot to the king. Now, right away, you would sit there and you would say, now pay me, reward me, give me riches, give me wealth, appoint me to a better position. I'm a mere translator. But Mordechai doesn't ask for anything. He simply walks away. And by doing so, he's acting as a genius. Because what happens now? Who owes him? The king forever owes him now. And the king looks at him as somebody who he owes. Somebody who's on his side. He can trust this Mordechai. And Mordechai simply goes away quietly. But now, Haman comes along. And Haman, the diabolical advisor to the king, the number two, the man who's evil beyond belief, but who also has an ego that rivals Ahasuerus' ego. And Haman sets up a power and a position for himself that almost rivals the king and gets the king to pass a law that everybody but the king must bow down to Haman. Mordechai refuses to bow down to Haman. The Jewish people bow down to only one, and that is God. And Mordechai refuses. This incenses Haman. It gets him furious. He can't take the fact that one person won't bow down to him. He can't understand it. He won't listen. He won't be able to handle life. And it says that all the wealth, all the power that he achieved meant nothing to him so long as he could not have Mordechai bow down to him. And he carries that hatred over to the entire Jewish people. He understands that Mordechai's hatred, Mordechai's refusal to bow down is not personal. It has nothing to do with Haman. He understands that it's about the Jewish people. And here's where Haman plots against the Jews. And he goes to the king and he pays the king a huge sum of money. At that, it's 10,000 silver shekel. At that time, it was an amazing amount. It was a fortune. He pays the king to allow him to commit genocide against the Jews. This was the first planned Holocaust. And it was done by a lot, a poor, which is why we get the name Purim. And it was done by a lottery to see what day. And it was going to be the 13th of Adar, was the day the Jews were going to be wiped out. Mordechai hears about the plot. He hears about the plot and he has to go ahead and get the plot to be changed. How do you do it? So we would say, without being experts in political maneuvering, Mordechai should approach the king. Remember when I saved your life? I need you to save my life. But then Mordechai is putting himself up against Haman. And who knows which way the king is going to decide? His trusted advisor? Or does he choose Mordechai, who saved him once? Maybe he says it's not enough. So Mordechai has to set something up now. What's Mordechai's secret weapon? He's got Queen Esther. Queen Esther, who happens to be his niece. And Mordechai now has to play puppet master. He has to set things up. And thankfully, Esther has that same wisdom and is able to see much further. And Mordechai comes to Esther and he says to Esther, you have to go in front of the king. And Esther says, I can't. No one goes in front of the king. You have to be invited. And Mordechai says to Esther something that you should always remember for the rest of your lives. Who knows if you weren't put in this position for this very moment to save the Jewish people? And if you don't save the Jewish people, your family will be wiped out and you'll have played no role in their salvation. Because God is going to save the Jewish people. It always happens that way. We're still here in 2021 and 5781. We're here thousands of years later. And in every generation, every single generation, someone has tried to wipe us out. And we've beaten them. It's your choice, but somebody will save us, whether you want to be a part of it or not. And that's Mordechai's charge to Esther. Esther listens, hears, and changes her mind and decides to take action. That's something that all of us have to do in our lives. When we're in a position to help the Jewish people, we must help. We can't sit there and say, let somebody else do it. We need to take action. And Esther's plan has two parts to it. The first one, she says, everybody go and fast, pray for 3 days. 3 days. These 3 days, by the way, were not the 3 days before Purim. These were the first 3 days of Pesach. That year, the Jews did not have a Pesach Seder. They fasted over their lives because they knew their lives hung in the distance. And the second thing, Esther starts to plan. How is she going to get Achashverosh, who, as much as she's married to him, she knows this man is not in love with her. This man killed his last wife. The fact that he might execute his next wife is not a big deal to him. So how can she get him? What's the one thing she can do to make sure Achashverosh listens to her over Haman? How can she do it? And she realizes, listens to this so carefully. She realizes that Achashverosh is a weak, paranoid man, always worried that somebody is thinking bad of him, always worried that somebody out there is plotting against him. And she realizes she has to set in his mind that Haman is plotting against him. So how does she go about doing it? She says to Achashverosh, I want to have a romantic dinner with you. She approaches Achashverosh in a daring way, in a way that could very well have her killed. She approaches Achashverosh and says, I'd like to have a romantic dinner. Something that never happens between the king and the queen. He hasn't seen her in 30 days. He hasn't called for her. And I want to have a romantic dinner, you and me and Haman. Right away, the king says, a romantic dinner, you, me, and Haman? Who invites a king's friend or advisor to a romantic dinner? So the king, a little bothered by it, goes and asks Esther, what can I do for you? What is it that you want that you called this dinner for? And she says, I want to have dinner again tomorrow night. Me and you and Haman. And Achashverosh, it drives him crazy. And that night he can't sleep, which brings the whole story up of Mordechai and puts Haman in a lower position and makes Haman weak. She set up the whole thing so that Achashverosh would be bothered like crazy, couldn't understand why is Haman coming, and he starts to suspect Haman. And at the next dinner, Achashverosh presses Esther and says, Esther, my love, what can I do for you? And she says, there's a man that wants to kill me, my family, and all my people. And at that dinner, she points right at Haman and says, it's him. He's the evil one. He's the one that wants to wipe us out. And at that point, Achashverosh is furious. All the pieces come together. It must be Haman was plotting against him. That must be what was happening the entire time. Haman, his trusted advisor, must have been the one that was plotting against him. And he can't believe it. And he runs outside to his yard and he sits there and he finally calms himself down. He comes in and Haman gets down on all fours in front of Esther and begs her. But when it comes back, what does it look like? It looks like he's trying to seduce Esther. And he says, in my own yard, in my own palace, you're trying to seduce the queen? And that's it for Haman. Achashverosh executes Haman. That's it. He goes crazy. He had to, Haman had set up gallows to hang Mordechai, and everything switches around. The next day, the Jews are allowed to defend themselves. They're allowed to attack. They come up, they start fighting, they win in every single province. But the leaders in Shushan are still around. The leaders of the anti-Semites are still around, and Esther asks Achashverosh for one more thing. It's not enough just to kill the soldiers. We have to go out and we have to kill the leaders. And she asks for one more day in Shushan to be able to wipe out the leaders. And in Shushan the next day, on the 14th of Adar, they kill another 300 people, the leadership of the anti-Semites. And those people, that's when there's complete rest and complete victory. And the Jewish people have the salvation. Revach v'atzala bala Yehudim. They have the salvation that they were praying for, that they worked for towards a year. And all of Mordechai's and Esther's maneuverings and setting up Achashverosh to look bad at Haman comes out and works. And the lesson for us is, as activists, as advocates, it's not enough just to sit back. We have to take action like Esther did. We have to think things through like Mordechai did. And we have to make sure that we understand our adversaries like Haman, just like the Jewish people did at that time, and then we can defeat them.